my question is, by cutting the Constellation program, what damage will that do to our superiority in space, to our national security, and the idea that we can somehow hand this off to commercial space flight, which maybe down the road could happen? My concern is that the handoff, it's not an appropriate handoff. They can't pick up the ball and run with it right now. And my concern is what's going to happen is we're going to have a gap in our superiority in space, and we're going to lose to the Chinese and the Russians. And so with that, Mr. Armstrong, can you give me your thoughts on that?
Thank you, sir. I certainly agree that if for the next decade we have no access to space, we will be viewed by people around the world as has been. That I would find that extremely uncomfortable with the enormous investment in resources and people's time over the past half century that we've expended in order to gain the position of leadership that we've enjoyed in recent years.
Gentleman, yield.
Yes.
May I add something very quick to that? If we are viewed by other nations, other people around the world as being willing to abdicate our leadership in space, what else do they believe we are willing to dismantle without reason?
It's very powerful, and I couldn't agree with you more. Mr. Young, do you have a response?
The only comment I would make is I think the reason all three of us advocate Ares 1, Orion, the elements of Constellation, is that it's our view that given where we are today, it's the best way to get an assured access to low Earth orbit. I mean, I think that's the fundamental underlying view for why we're advocates of that solution.
Captain Cernan, if I could just follow up, that response, what else would they be willing to give up? The backdrop to the space program has always been national security as well, and that's one of my main concerns with this decision by the President. Can you comment on that?
I'm sorry.
In terms of what impact will this have on our national security?
Oh, I think it'll have a significant effect. We won't have, if we give up on a shuttle today, the shuttle doesn't just service a space station. It's an asset for national security. We can access probably almost anywhere in low Earth orbit we need to be to do anything we want to do: repair, recover, replace satellites. We can scientific missions like the Hubble. I think it affects our international security because we don't have access. We don't have the capability to be there when we need to be there. We are hostage, literally hostage, as I say, to other nations. And it also implies subjectively that we no longer care. We no longer, something happens in some other place in the world, don't worry about it. They don't care. They're not going to come to our rescue. They're not going to protect freedom around the world, which is something, I guess, for the last 200 some odd years we've been destined to do. So there are subjective reasons as well as a physical capability to access a plateau that, above the Earth, to do things that could never have been done there before from a national security point of view.
I am concerned that replacing NASA at the head of the manned space program with some TBD commercial enterprise will in fact dramatically compromise the safety of the astronauts. And I'd like you all to address that point, starting with Mr. Young.
Two gentlemen to my right are most qualified to say that. I think it would go even well beyond that. I think it would jeopardize the safety of the United States human spaceflight program.
Because one failure would have such dramatic repercussions.
Well, yeah, but see, my definition of failure is it could be a flight failure, or it could be just a massive overrun, or it could be just a massive schedule delay, which we've seen a few of. or it could be the failure to be able to complete a program, which we've also seen. So I think failure can be any one of those, of those circumstances. And so either one of those, I think, would have just a devastating impact on not only NASA, but the United States space program.
Captain Cernan?
Many years ago, I worked on Apollo Soyuz. We learned a lot about the Russian program we never knew, and sometimes this is important to know what they didn't know as much as what we didn't know. And the Russian cosmonauts would play volleyball and swim and had requirements to stay physically in shape and do a little homework on the physics and geometry of the world, and they'd send them down to Baikonur and open up a hatch and put them in, and off they'd go. I said earlier, and I don't want to spend too much time, we lived 24/7 from the day we got involved with our spacecraft, whether it was Gemini program, Apollo, or whatever it is. We lived, we owned, we knew the people who were building it. They dedicated their lives to putting the screws in the heat shield so that it wouldn't come apart when we re-entered the Earth. This is a kind of culture we grew up and we lived in. Now, if it went to the commercial sector, as an astronaut, I got to believe we would have to recreate that culture, or I'm not getting in it. I mean, I didn't go to the moon not to come home. I mean, I planned to come home all along, but I knew I was coming home because of those people and because of the culture that we worked within at NASA.
And last but for sure not least, Mr. Armstrong.
I included in my written testimony some comments regarding commercial. First, I say I'm very much in favor of the commercial activity, and I'm very hopeful that they will have the progress that they hope for. Nevertheless, they face a very difficult business case. The market is extremely thin, and the investor contribution to that project is going to be must be substantially larger than the government contribution by their business plan, and that business plan looks highly suspect. I recall recently reading an article by Brewster Shaw, former astronaut and now working responsible position in space for Boeing, and he was trying to explain to the readers the difficulty he faced in convincing his boss, Jim McInerney, that was a good business to get in. There's a good enough chance for that to be a business success they should get in it. He said it'll be a hard sell, but he said I'm hopeful. And it's going to be equally difficult for any other commercial space provider to make that case to their investors without the developed market. And I think that's a serious impediment that they just we need to recognize and they need to overcome. And I hope they can, and I hope that market develops. But right now, it's very difficult to see that it will.
Thank you.
Thank you,
It's a
Mr.
pleasure and an honor to
Just-
meet you all.
Could I just add briefly to that?
Okay. Yes.
Neil's comments and Gene's reminded me of this, but there are extra steps that make these things successful. When Apollo was being developed, I was actually at NASA's Langley Research Center, and I was working on a program called Viking, where we landed a couple of spacecraft on Mars. Langley actually built something that looked like a big saw bench that had a 1.6G simulator. You could actually fly power flights at 1.6G, equivalent to the moon. And I used to drive home late at night and ride by when the lights were on, and Neil Armstrong was in there flying that test vehicle, practicing for going to the moon. They're the extra things that make these things happen. Langley building that facility, Neil coming up from JSC to fly it, the industry people being involved. It's just an example, but you remind me of it. That's the kind of partnership that makes these things happen. You don't write that in a safety requirements document. You probably would never write in there, if you're not doing anything on Friday night, why don't you come up and fly the 16G simulator? It's those special ingredients. That's why this business, which is a one strike and you're out business, has been as successful as it has been. Thank you.